Story 1. Quarantine. Working in a nuclear reactor is difficult work, no matter what the task. Even the most menial job, including mine, janitorial services, required rigorous education on emergency procedures, and that we be subjected to frequent training drills, and most tediously handed flurries of clearance codes and floor plans, the Montina, and staff never bothered to memorize these. Of course, we were under the impression all of this hassle was superfluous. Besides, everybody knew that, pragmatically, if something were to go wrong in the atom furnace, there was very little one could actually do to save themselves. Besides the janitors and technicians, there were the white-coated, short-sighted scientists we would seldom see, always tucked away in the control rooms. I was in awe of the delicacy of their work. It was hard to imagine that the slightest of their miscalculations could lead to that which I least desired, a nuclear explosion or a leak. Both possibilities were rather terrifying. My colleagues seemed to be less concerned by the imminence of danger that came with our jobs than somebody told me once. At least we'd make it on to the news. If this thing were to blow, although it was in poor taste, it assured me that perhaps this job not as frightening as I thought, or maybe it was the relatively high pay that convinced me. Either way, I was not going anywhere. Cleaning the sterile concrete corridors was a regular routine, but one day, my final hour on the shift was interrupted by a bleep on my walkie-talkie. I plopped down my mop and reached for my belt. This was perhaps the first time I had even heard the sound of my walkie-talkie since my employment in here, and wasn't even sure who had access to my frequency. Hello, yes, I said, unsure of the walkie-talkie answering procedure. Hi, this is John from Counter. Oh, I was taken aback. The scientist had never contacted me. Look, we have a shortage of staff today, and we need help in Control Room 1. It went back to static before I could reply. Control Room 1, I thought, as I pulled a small notebook from my fanny pack. The notebook was filled with all the clearance codes and maps I was given in my first week on the job. Luckily, there were only 2 control rooms, so I pinpointed the location of Control Room 1. With ease, it was a few minutes away from where I was standing. I pushed my wringer bucket and mop to the side and headed towards my destination. I knew that at this point the rest of my colleagues had left, including those more qualified than I was to be handling whatever the scientist wanted me to do. I was working overtime. The corridors, lit by the harsh neon lights, narrowed as I approached the supposed location of the control room. The door was undoubtedly the one I was searching for. I popped the keypad open and input the appropriate clearance code. The clean black and yellow door slid up. Nobody was there, though in and of itself this was not frightening. I had always had the impression that this space was to be occupied at all times. Was the reactor even be allowed to run unsupervised? Clearly so, or else I would have known the answer already. My walkie beeped, snapping me out of my daze. I suppose the levers and de-flashing buttons distracted me. Are you there yet? The person asked me. Literally just got here, I responded. Why is nobody here? We are downstairs by the reactor. We're just fixing something. Listen, we just need you to lift the control rods up a few centimeters so that we can increase the fission rate before this evening's electrical surge. Utterly baffled by everything the voice had told me, I couldn't help but feel that the very fact that I was trusted with the responsibility of raising the fission rate in the station, that there must have been something terribly wrong. Here, I'll explain how the scientist continued. See the green lever at the very front of the room? I see it. Should I push it or something? God, no, wait, you need to lift it up to level 4. I walked up to the lever and noticed it was already on level 4. It's already on 4, I began, before being interrupted. Then 5, lift to 5. I could feel the urgency in his voice. I cringed as I placed my palm on the round knob of the lever and raised it to the 5th setting. A dull whirring and clanking sound radiated from the surrounding walls. I recoiled from the lever. That was it. I assumed it worked, because otherwise I would have known. I opened the walkie frequency again. Unnerving radio silence was all that could now be heard. I suspected that he increased fission rate must have been blocking the signal, or at least I hoped it was something like that, which would equate to some sort of scientific or rational explanation. I stepped to T of the room and closed the sliding door. I got my thoughts together. Leaving the building then seemed irresponsible. I needed some closure. Had I done my job properly? I checked my watch. Hasty as 10 p.m. rolled around, and so the lights began to shut off one by one. The wave of darkness drew closer to me until all the neon lights in my corridor were off. The thick afterimage remained. Yet in my sight the lights were off by 10 p.m. every day. Perhaps I should be heading home, I thought. No, on second thought, I couldn't leave the job half done. I needed to be certain had worked. I pulled out a notepad I had in my chest pocket. In it, I had previously jotted down everything that was to be done in case of an emergency. I flipped through the pages until one section caught my attention. Security cameras, control quarters, too. Maybe I could see if everything was okay through the security cameras. I jogged around the maze to where my roughly sketched head map said the second control quarters should be. I made my way to control room 2. As I made my approach, it dawned on me that the second control room had a different entry code. I was leave. Yet I had not written it down. Strangely then, I caught a faint light coming from around the corner. From approximately where the second control room was, I poked my head around the corner and was stunned by the sight of the control room. Doors standing wide open, I walked into the room with the neon light shining overhead. I paused again at the sound of footsteps in the distance. The security logs were open, and I turned to the screens, all of them, save one, displayed pitch black, and that one was dim. Fortunately, I remembered to up the contrast as I did my here. T sank on screen. I saw the vague outline of 3 or 4 men lying on the ground, piled up against the locked door near the fishing rods. I didn't need to be a genius to know they had been exposed to high levels of radiation. Oh, God! Had I done this? No, I rationalized. That wasn't possible. All I had done was change fission levels from control room 1, under instruction from skilled technicians. WH had happened. I looked back at the screens, and that's when it hit me. The barrier protecting the victims from the fishing rods themselves was elevated. I whipped my head around. I knew the barrier could only be operated from the room I was in, and I certainly didn't touch anything. But then, who did? I looked around to find the exact switch that lifted it. The sight of a tear in the dashboard petrified me. one solid line, right through the metal, right through the label, which said, Raise Barrier. Whoever had done this didn't just push the switch, they stabbed it with great force, no precision, no purpose. But as far as I could tell, the rest of the room was intact. Fuck this. I'm leaving, I thought. I grabbed the flashlight and dashed in. To the corridor, I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. I knew I wasn't alone. Or who's there? Anybody. I could hear the footsteps again. They were fast. They were getty. And louder. I froze. As the footsteps approached, I could now hear just how strong they were hitting the ground, cracking at the corrugated metal on the floor. The clanking was approaching, and all I could do was dash the corner and turn the flashlight off. They were so unbelievably loud I couldn't think. I pressed myself up against the wall. I didn't want whatever was coming running into me. A gust of wind pushes me as whatever has just passed me continues running down the corridor. I conceal my urge to scream, that my eyes began to tear up. The smell was mortifying. It resembled nothing I had ever encountered, and in my long and not so prosperous cleaning career, I had experienced some bad smells. There was something ill about this one. It actually burned at the nostrils. I turned and ran in the opposite direction from which whatever just came past me. It was time I headed towards the exit. I ran until I couldn't hear the footsteps and gathered the courage to pull out the flashlight again to look at the map. I was around the first control room. I realized the building was cyclical. This meant that the thing was near me, or was it to escape this maze? I knew where the exit was. I reached the locker room. I ran up to my locker and grabbed my rucksack. I was leaving. I ran up to the exit, and as I pushed up against it, I bounced off. The door was locked. I shuffled for my keys and put them in. The doors were unlocked already. The door was sealed from the outside. I could hear the footsteps again. I pulled out the walkie and started shifting all the frequencies. Help, help. One frequency picked up a signal. Oh, thank God. Please, unlock these doors. I heard mumbles. On the other end, frustrated, I yelled down at it again. Is there somebody still in there? I heard on the other end, yes, let me out. I'm afraid we can't do that. This area is under quarantine, says the other voice calmly. Under quarantine. I'm clean. I'm not irradiated. We know there is something in here with me. We know. What is it? The voice on the other end paused, and then said calmly, We don't know. It's hard to tell. Was probably a person once, but radiation will do that to you know. To what? I shouted. Well, you've seen what it looks like, right? No, please let me out. This area is under quarantine. The thing, it's tall, has tumors from the cellular mitosis, and its eyes aren't in their sockets. Only a matter of time before it dies from every cancer known to man. The footsteps drew closer. The corridor was still pitch black, but the light of my walkie illuminated a silhouette. A vile screech was released. It was tall, broken, limping, and horrid. I won't really die, will I? The thing limped to a halt and stumbled over. As it did, some of its tumors burst, splattering blood in all directions, which then began leaking into the locker room. Was it dead? It's dead. It's dead, I shouted into the walkie. You can let me out now. Oh, man. Someone on the other hand replied derisively, You aren't catching on. This area is under quarantine. That thing there, it isn't the only one. Again I heard a scream, coming not from the disfigured body on the floor, but from somewhere beyond in the maze of corridors behind me. The scream was vaguely human, yet at the same time far too loud and ill-sounding. A moment later, I heard another one, coming from yet another location, then another and another, over and over, until the entire plant echoed with the din of unbearable screams and, like the calamitous roar of a concert, they were coming for me. The voice on the walkie repeated calmly, "This is looking bleak for you, but there's nothing you can do. Just hang around the entrance. Perhaps that will buy you some time. In the long term, of course, it's useless. I was speak, less these things will be dead in a few days, but you will be too." The voice continued, "Please accept our apologies. Government agents will be called in later to assist with the disposal of the creatures' bodies, write off the event as a work-related accident, and close the station down for a while. The public won't know a word of what happened here, as you're a witness. I wouldn't expect the authorities to treat you too kindly, so trust me when I say things are better this way." I gathered the energy to utter one final word. "Please, sorry." My friend put, "That's not possible. This is a quarantine. No exceptions." Story 2. The Tale of Moll Dyer. After 10 years of nightmarish terror, saved only by the conviction of the reality that I witnessed th. At night I will vouch for the truth of what really happened to Ruby Trent. For the longest time I held on to the hope that my experience was partly phantasmagoria, yet the reality of it is so horrific that I often wish for it to be a figment of my imagination. Assuming that I was sober and sane, what I witnessed that night was a warning to heed the advice conveyed to us through myth and legend. There is no proof that my story is true. But if you have ever believed in the darkness of the human soul and the existence of otherworldly forces, I pray that you will believe my tale and learn from our mistakes. When I came upon the specter I'd been alone, I could not stop Ruby from tempting the spirit. But maybe you will listen to my counsel. My name is Laura Walker. Perhaps you recall the Mo Niker from last decade's newspapers and television exposure. The newscasts at the time were inundated with the details of my miraculous survival and the grisly death of my late friend Ruby. After all, as a rather famous Baltimorean writer once said, the death of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world. Ruby and I were in the midst of the winter semester of our senior year at Bryn Mawr High School. Ruby was known for her stunning beauty, while I, on the other hand, had been more of the bookish persuasion. I relished in the idea of being st friends with the queen bee. One might question how such a kinship came to be. The answer is simple. Both Ruby and I were obsessed with horror. Not the horrors of everyday life, of course. We were not obsessed with the horrors of war, famine, and disease. We were not interested in the horror that our beloved city was decaying and crumbling before our very eyes. We delighted in tales of th. macabre. Local urban legends held a special place in our hearts, and that winter I discovered one of the most captivating urban legends Maryland had to offer. The first mistake I made was telling Ruby the legend. Long ago in the village of Leonardtown, Maryland, lived a woman named Moll Dyer, Accused of witchcraft, Moll fled from her captors on a snowy winter's night. Taking refuge in the woods, she stopped to rest against a large boulder. The next morning, Moll was found dead, frozen, and fused to the rock. Legend says that anyone who touches the impressions that she left behind on the boulder will be visited by the spirit of Moll Dyer, but will never live to tell the tale. Naturally, Ruby was intrigued by such a proposition. We'd visited many local haunts, but Black Aggie's statue never wrapped its arms around us. There were no cries when we turned off our headlights on Crybaby Bridge, and no caretaker tracked us down with his shotgun and vicious dogs at Line's house. Ruby and I held fast to our hopes of witnessing something paranormal in our lifetime. That is where we made our next mistake and made our pilgrimage to Leonardtown. Friday evening after school, we made our way to Leonardtown. The quaint village was located in St. Mary's County and was known more for its oyster-shucking competition than its sordid history of witch hunts. But the tale of witchcraft and the curse of Moll Dyer loomed over the ancient Maryland town. The skies were moist and cloudy that evening, and the weather forecast promised a substantial snowstorm late that night. Piecing together the tales which we'd collected from the internet and supplementing them with the accounts of several local residents, I deduced the relative location of Moll Dyer's rock. I was much less disturbed by the legend of the ghost and more concerned about traveling into an unfamiliar forest with an impending storm. But the allure of the story had been too great for Ruby, and she managed to persuade me to accompany her into the woods. That was the most fatal of my mistakes. Night was swiftly descending upon us as we reached the outskirts of the forest, and the dank twilight we trudged into the darkness of the woods. I shivered fiercely while struggling to find a foothold through the overgrown gnarled tree roots that twisted and protruded through the wasteland as far as the eye could see. Stumbling through a rocky makeshift path in somber solitude, the shade grew denser and the air around us filled with the dismal sense of malice. The endless woods seemed to swallow us up as my feet groped in vain for purchase of a smooth path. There was none to be found. It was likely that this woodland had remained isolated and unvisited for decades. Then unexpectedly we came upon the boulder, rough with strange indentations that resemble the legendary handprints of Moll Dyer. At that moment a terrible feeling seeped its way through me like a stain seeps through a piece of cloth. The nightmare was quick to come against my advisement. Ruby placed her hand to the impression on the slab. There occurred immediately the most horrific event that I had ever or would ever see. Her cries were shocking, so shocking that for a moment I stood dazed and trembling, cursing myself for the swigs of Mr. Jack Daniels liquid courage that we'd snuck in the car before we stepped into this hellhole. Ruby was unable to move her hand. It had become affixed to the massive stone. I moved toward her as quickly as my feet would carry me under the petrifying circumstances. The closer I came to her, the less I became sure of what measures to take in order to help my friend, standing no more than 3 feet away and the boulder I beheld in full formidable vividness, the beginnings of heavy snowfall as lightning struck Ruby dead in an instant. My companion's charred and blackened remains lay slumped over the the mingled sense of scorched flesh and seared hair assaulted my nostrils. With the putrid stench came the terrifying revelation that I was now alone in the desolate countryside, that I was unaccustomed, too, with nothing more on my person than a coat that was too thin for the biting cold that enveloped me, and a fickle flashlight that only functioned half the time I frantically searched for a way out. My youthful foolishness led me to believe that I'd memorize the map that was left behind in Ruby's car. Even though I had examined the ancient map with the greatest care, I was unprepared for the difficult trip ahead of me. My memory of our expedition was broken, for my mental health was greatly disturbed after witnessing my friend's demise. I wondered for what else. Like Ian's, the snowfall accumulating quickly around Emmy, soon it became ankle-deep, making it increasingly challenging to travel. I noticed that there were footprints all around me and was convinced that I had been traveling in circles, that is, until I saw a hooded figure hunched over in the distance. Crying tears of relief, I ran as fast as I could toward it. Surely one of the villagers we'd spoken to earlier that evening had come, searching for us. As I approached the figure, my flashlight faltered, and the voice of an old woman beckoned me to follow her to safety. I was apprehensive about following this shrouded stranger, but there were no alternative options at my disposal. The flashlight flickered what I remained on the heels of the old woman as we made our way through the trees. Desperately I tried to see the face of my savior, but all I was able to make out was the ratty gray cloak that encased her. The wind howled and ice crystals stung my face as I asked. Trackled along, hours passed, and my guide remained silent. Throughout our journey, my gloveless fingers began to tinge with the unmistakable signs of frostbite. Numb feet carried me sluggishly through the twisted maze of petrified timber. I staggered onward, weakening with each cumbersome step. The snow was almost knee-deep, and I said a silent prayer that we would come upon sanctuary soon. Once again I attempted to speak to the old woman, questioning where we were going. She spoke not a word, but the sinister laugh that she unleashed told me everything I needed to know. In my desperate iron for escape, I'd neglected to notice that she was not leading me back to the car. This whole time she'd been leading me further into the woods. A mixture of rage and horror filled me. My faulty flashlight flickered back on, illuminating the figure that stood before me. With frozen hands I yanked the hood from her head and shined the artificial light upon her face. Nothing could have prepared me for the monstrosity that stared back at me. So hideous was this creature that it is almost indescribable. But I shall do my best to give you an accurate portrayal, so that you may know the beast should you happen upon it. Her eyes were hollow, pitch black, and the recesses that once held eyeballs now writhed with the likes of maggots and worms. The monster's gray hair was caked with mud and the crumpled remains of dead leaves and decaying tree bark, a stray spider climbing the filthy strands as if it were its web. Thin, cracked lips peeled back over rotted teeth as the hideous creature smiled menacingly at me. But more frightening than anything else I had seen was its face, for it resembled melted wax that made all of its remaining features indistinguishable. There was no forehead, no cheeks, no chin. The entity lacked a nose and ears. It was then that I realized that the featureless face was not composed of wax-like skin, but rather bluish-white icicles that had once been a human face, the face of Moll Dyer. Transfixed by the repulsiveness that stood before me, I was almost paralyzed. My eyes, refusing to close, were mercifully blurred by the gusting wind and slashing snow. I tried to lift my hands again to shield myself from the sight of her, yet my nerves had been so stunned by the cold and by the horror in front of me that I could make them obey. Such efforts disturbed my balance, causing me to stagger backwards, falling into a mound of snow. The world around me spun and fell silent. I could not hear the bending of the trees or the howling of the wind. Only the sound of the witch's hideous hollow breathing could be heard. I did not shriek, for the ability had escaped me. Her figure hovered above me, kneeling down to make I see. On tact, her sour breath skittered across my face as several maggots fell from her eye sockets onto my cheeks. I writhed and twisted to move away from her, but my body refused to obey me. The monstrous cackle that she discharged chilled me in a way that the storm would not rival. The last thing I remember before blacking out was her wicked grin and the touch of her frigid, bony fingers on my forehead. The details of my rescue are still rather vague. At some point, my parents had phoned the local police station. A search party found me on the brink of death, and I awakened the following day. Why in a hospital bed? That trip had cost me a great deal. I lost more than you could ever dream of losing. 3 fingers for toes, my best friend, and for a brief time my sanity. Eventually I came back around and began to speak again. How I survived the curse of Moll Dyer remains a mystery. I still wonder why my life was spared. Perhaps she wanted me to issue a warning to RS. No eye has seen and no hand has touched that wretched rock ever since. That is why I implore you to call off your search for the accursed thing. Perhaps you think me mad or believe that Ruby's death is a coincidence, a random act of nature, but I beseech you, please, do not search for the witch. I somehow escaped her clutches, but you may not be as lucky. Story 3, Watchman Woods. My name isn't really important, but for the sake of this story, let's just say I'm Ruby. Yeah, that works. In any case, I'm currently a junior in high school. I've got a lot of friends, and I'm happy with life, but all of this happened during my sophomore year, and trust me, nothing has ever been the same since. I'll start with the town lore. A few hundred years back, there was a huge spike in the number of missing people around the area we call Watchman Woods. It's a fairly large forest, and it's dense too. The limbs are so tightly woven together, and the trunks are so close it's like a maze. No daylight reaches that place. But back then I guess there were a lot less trees and a lot more valuable resources other than just a squishy swamp. And, well, the people that went in there sometimes didn't come back out, and the ones that did were never, ever the same. They'd become mute most of the time, their eyes glued to those woods. Then the people started coming back. I know, the usual setup for a creepy story, but these people weren't the same either. They all had a dead look in their eyes, but they smiled as if the forest was the most wonderful place on earth. Nah, they were always so obvious when you saw them, but somehow they were still able to lure people in behind them. That's how the majority of people around here went missing, because they saw their loved ones and wanted to bring them home. There hadn't been a missing persons report in town since like 1950, but people still listened to this bedtime story because, well, those woods were fucking creepy. Until January of my sophomore year, though, and news spread that Chloe was gone, just up and vanished. What if she went into the woods, my friend Trev, or asked me one day, you know how interested she was in the folklore, that girl could have gotten herself killed for all we know. Take it down a notch, Trevor, I hissed, pulling him to the side. We can't just go saying things like that. There hasn't been a Watchman Woods incident in decades. Don't you think it's about time there was? That last sentence chilled me to the bone. The rest of the day I was pretty shaken up. So was everyone else in school. I was pretty quiet until I got home to find that my mom was out shopping and my dad was still at work. I kicked back in the recliner and watched some television until I saw a news report about Chloe, 5'2", 17, wavy black hair and blue eyes. They had a pretty picture of her up on the screen, and it sort of hurt to see her there. I went to turn off the TV, and that's when I heard it. Someone was outside my goddamn house, and they were calling my name. Ruby, the silky female tone appeared to be coming from my back door. Ruby, come here. It's me, Chloe. That's all I heard before I was up and off the couch, sprinting towards the back door. When I got there, I practically tossed it off of its hinges and whipped my head from side to side, looking for the girl. There was no way in hell she knew where I lived. We weren't even that close, but she was still my friend. At the time, we had one of those old wooden peg-styled fences where there were two vertical posts, and there'd be circular gouges cut in the sides to put into horizontal wooden posts with tapered ends to fit the holes, the latch on. The back gate was nothing more than a pin and two circles. So I pulled the pin and ran to the edge of the woods. Oh, I forgot to mention that, didn't I? We lived right on the edge of Watchman Woods, so close that I could almost smell the wafting scent of death from the bogs and the broken carcasses from animals and whatever else that got trapped in them. Chloe, I shouted, looking around. Chloe, are you there? No answer. I took a deep breath and pretty much gagged from the lumful I got. Deciding that enough was enough, I went back inside to wait for my parents to get home, but I didn't tell them about it. What would I say? Oh yeah, the girl who went missing was at our back door, and she was sucked up into the woods like everyone else who goes missing around here. No, that wouldn't do anyone good. The next night my parents were leaving for some dinner thing, and they said I could have a few friends over if I wanted. They trusted me not to do something stupid, and for tea. And I was glad, because not even 5 minutes after they left did I begin calling at least 10 people. There wasn't going to be a party of the normal kind. I wanted to have a search party formed. Trevor was more than willing to go into the woods, but everyone else was ready to piss themselves at the thought of it. One girl, though, who I hadn't even realized was here, said she'd go. Hadley go because she didn't believe in that sort of stuff. Do you really want to go out into the swamp, Hannah? I questioned, pulling her to the side. She was my ex-boyfriend's little sister, younger by a year. She was a freshman and, to be honest, sort of bitchy. I don't even know how she got here or how she found out, but I guess I did call my ex and tell him. She probably overreared and thought it would be a good chance to get out of the house. After all, she was treated like she wasn't there. I'm down for it. She pulled her black hair back into a ponytail, taking off her pink brand jacket only after she had it perfect. You guys are all fucking pussies. There's nothing back there. Fine, I scowled, returning to the group. Whoever's coming, get ready. I'm going to go get a jacket and flashlights. We leave in 5. I left momentarily to get the aforementioned items. And this was where it got weird. I started hearing something outside my window, like soft singing, mixed with giggling that in an instant turned into maniacal laughter. My blood turned to ice as I bolted out of my room and ran into the front to make sure everyone was the Ray 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 9. I had to do another count to make sure I was right, and I got 9 again. The horror clawed its way up my spine as I dropped the flashlights. "Where's Hannah?" I asked shakily. Everyone looked confused until Trevor stepped forward. "You mean the freshman girl? She ran out the back saying something about a stupid myth." "Oh no," I whimpered, grabbing a flashlight. "God, why did she have to be so stupid? Can't she just listen to someone for once in her life?" I kicked open the back door to see the woods beginning to darken. I steeled my nerves and ran forward, reaching the edge of the fence before I stopped. I could hear the sounds of someone saying help and branches breaking underneath heavy footsteps. But what I saw next would stay with me for the rest of my life. There was Hannah running through the woods, fear plastered to her face like the sweat that was dripping from her forehead. The full moon gave me enough light to pull the pin out of the gate and run forward, pushing her behind me when I saw the thing chasing her. It wasn't human, it wasn't an animal. No, it Washington as something else altogether. It was white or translucent, if that could be applied. It was at least 7 or 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs, and looked to be like it was a living tree, but its limbs were like sticks, and its head was nothing more than a gnarled mass of bark and hollow eyes, a gaping mouth turned down in a hungry scowl. As it reached for me, I saw more of them in the trees behind it, all with their heads cocked to the side as they waited to see me killed or turned into whatever the hell people were turned into when they had been caught. But that didn't happen. The creature's arms didn't even touch me. Instead, a girl stood in between it and I, outstretched arms blockading me from being hurt. Even though she was shorter, the air of fierceness surrounded H. More than anything, Chloe was there, but she also wasn't. She was already dead, a spirit, but she had enough control left to stand up to the captors of her soul. "Oh, Ruby," she said quietly, "they'll kill me for this. Save yourself." Her eyes turned to ash, and so did the rest of her as she crumbled away in its grasp. I slammed the door shut and didn't look again. I pushed past everyone in the front room, knowing that Trevor had kept them inside while I ran. Instead, I grabbed my phone and dialed my ex, waiting for him to pick up. He sounded tired as hell when he did, but he didn't mind that it was me calling. "Ruby, what's going on? I need you to come pick up your sister. Hannah has been nothing but a disaster, and she almost got me killed." "Ed, that kid, did you say Hannah?" His cut-off response was quiet, almost fearful. "Yes, I said Hannah." "Ruby, how do you know that name? Your bratty little sister who is a grade below us and always sat on the couch with her phone when I was over." "Why, Ruby, my sister Hannah died 3 years ago when we first moved here." The air almost seemed to quiet itself. She ran into Watchman Woods to prove that it was just a story and never came back out. We never told a soul about her. It was better just to leave the past in the past. But she was here, then it dawned on me why everyone always seemed to ignore her. Why she was never with anyone at school. She was a fucking puppet this whole time. And an image came to mind that I regret never taking more interest in. I'd seen Hannah talking to Chloe not even a week before she disappeared, probably planting the idea in her head. No, she wasn't. Everyone was in a blind panic until I sent them home my statue. Tea all night, too scared to sleep, researching whatever the hell those could possibly be. I found a blog post back from 2007 from someone in our area about the woods. They called the creatures watchmen, fitting, I suppose, described them like wood nymphs or dryads, except instead of the friendly female form, they were the animated forest trees that didn't take kindly to visitors. They were like spirits themselves almost. The months following that incident I never saw Hannah again. She was gone completely, not a trace of her left. When I told Trevor, he about had a nervous breakdown thinking he was shit crazy. I myself was worried there was something wrong with my own head. What I haven't been able to completely trust anyone in my town since then. Especially the kids that always sat alone, like they were just new to the school or something. But in some of them I began to see the dead look in their eyes. I started paying closer attention to myself after that. I regret to inform Anyon, reading this, that I have started to see the watchmen around town now. They're no longer sticking to the forest. I guess they were there all along. It's getting hard to stay out of the forest, actually, now that I'm seeing it everywhere. The school is gone, the store is gone, it's all trees. I can't even go home now because it's gone. Replaced by trees, SS my parents. Pretty soon I'll wake up and I'll already be in the woods with their empty eyes just staring at me. Maybe it isn't so bad. Story for the fishing trip. Hold the head steady, Mr. Walker. I don't want to cock this up. Swelling waves cause the ship to roll beneath my feet as I do my best to follow Professor Oleg's order. Unfortunately, the ox is not cooperating and pulls jerkingly against the rope securely fastened to the ring through its nose while emitting low panicked bellows, its eyes rolling wildly in their sockets. Tend in the makeshift stable below deck, there's nowhere for it to run, even if it wasn't currently on a vessel somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and several hundred miles from the nearest thing resembling land. Something has the beast terrified, although it could be it simply senses the striking woman standing in front of it with an air gun has less than peaceful intentions. For fuck's sake, Charlie, I know you can pull a rope tighter than that. I've got the burns on my wrists to prove it. I flash Helen a glare as I struggle with the rope, my cheeks flushing bright red from equal parts anger and embarrassment. She responds with a wicked grin. It's no secret we're sleeping together. That's how I was conned into going on this little cruise after all. But I still don't feel the need to blatantly parade the fact arrow. And in front of her father, Dr. Reinhard Oleg is a visiting professor out of Oslo whose expertise is in cryptozoology. I hadn't realized such a degree even existed, but apparently I'm not as informed as I thought. The Loch Ness Monster, the Wendigo, the Tatzelworm. Oleg has dedicated years of his life to studying and cataloging the stories and legends of these and dozens of other fantastic creatures. going so far as to conduct extensive field research into claims of their existence. Due to his lean, sharp features, surprisingly cunning intellect, and most probably his parents' choice of names, Oleg has been dubbed the Fox in pretty much every circle he inhabits. His daughter Helen serves as his primary research assistant and as such is accompanying him for the duration of his stay at Miskatonic University, where I'm studying for my doctorate in engineering. Her raven black hair and oddly shaded eyes, steel gray flecked with purple, give her an exotic if decidedly unknowed icy appearance. Still, she has the muscle tone of an Olympic gymnast, and at 5'10" could easily be imagined falling into the ranks of the fabled Valkyrie. I first saw her at a social mixer last fall and was immediately taken. Imagine my shock when my lame attempts to talk to her were accepted and even encouraged. 2 weeks later we were fucking like it was going out of style. Our relationship stayed on that course for about 6 months when she informed me she would be going with her father for an extended trip during the summer as part of his research. Would I like to accompany them? The fact that she'd been naked when she asked probably helped guide my decision. That's how I came to be wrangling a terrified ox on a Korean manned fishing boat 600 miles off the Japanese coast. Wrapping the rope more firmly around my hands, I brace my foot against the bulkhead and pull as hard as I can, momentarily arresting the panicked animal's movement. Hit it, Jesus. Hit it now. Helen professionally places the air gun between the ox's eyes and smoothly depresses the trigger, punching the tiny metal rod through skin and bone and into the creature's brain. Its eyes roll back in its skull and its slack tongue lolls out of its mouth before the ox collapses to its knees and finally slumps to the floor on its side. I disentangle myself from the rope, angry, red depressions crisscrossing my hands and up my arms, and wipe the sweat from my forehead. Christ, I've never done this before. But, don't they usually use a cattle prod or something to stun these guys first? The fox gives me a pinched look. In your typical slaughterhouse, yes, Mr. Walker, but I found it best to avoid using electricity whenever possible in these matters. There can be unforeseen complications. Besides, certain research suggests the chemicals released in the brain due to intense fear serve as something of an intoxicating marinade for more predatory creature race, all the better for our purposes here. Stunning the beast beforehand could rob us of a potential advantage. Helen, if you would please, exchanging her airgun for an enormous B-1 saw. Helen enters the pen and begins working on the dead ox's neck. The metal teeth slide through muscle and tissue as Helen manipulates the saw as smoothly as a lumberjack. It catches briefly where, and it hits vertebrae, but she pulls the blade free with a sickening cracking noise of snapping bone before repositioning and continuing her grisly work. I feel my gorge rise to the base of my throat and glance down at the floor only to leap away from the slowly growing pool of blood that has spread from the pen and now threatens to soak my boots. I hastily move away from the danger zone and turn my eyes from the butchery, desperately wishing I could turn off the squelching sounds as easily. So, Doc, tell me again exactly what we're doing here. Oleg sighs as I've explained. Mr. Walker, we are in search of Jormungandr, the world serpent, most likely, and the creature known as Leviathan in Christian tradition are one and the same. Legend has it the beast was so large it could encircle the world to the point of holding its own tail in its mouth, although that is likely an exaggeration. According to Norse mythology, when Jormungandr releases its tail, it will initiate Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. During the final battle, the serpent will confront its father Loki's hated enemy Thor, resulting in their mutual destruction. All of my research indicates the creature's head will be located somewhere in this vicinity, near the Mariana Trench, as the lowest point on the planet and one of the few environments not fully explored by humans. It is the most likely location a creature at large could remain relatively undetected, and it's a fan of ox roast, huh? Oleg glares at me, he asked, in one of the most commonly artisty, Kali-rendered stories. Thor managed to accidentally catch Jormungandr on his hook, which he baited with an ox head. He attempted to kill the serpent with his hammer Mjolnir, but, oaf that he was, managed to let Jormungandr escape. We are attempting to recreate this event. But, Professor, what exactly are you planning to do if you actually manage to catch this thing? Finished beaming, Helen hefts the severed ox head to her shoulder. Her hands and face are spattered with crimson, and a slow trickle of blood continues to seep from the stump of the creature's neck and drip to the floor. Her strange speckled eyes are alight with excitement and anticipation. Excellent, my dear. Let's get our bait up to the main deck. Ignoring my question, the fox turns and leads the way up the stairs, Helen following closely, carrying her macabre prize. I stay a little behind and glance back at the pen. The ox's body remains slumped where it fell, the muscles of the legs twitching and jerking ever so slightly as the onset of rigor mortis slowly takes hold. I involuntarily shudder and turn after the professor and his daughter. When I reach the deck, I notice that the sky has turned dark as storm clouds above seethe angrily, and the waves beneath respond in kind, rocking the boat more and more violently beneath my feet. The crew has gathered in a tight crowd off to the side surrounding their captain. I don't speak Korean, but it's obvious. They're arguing with him about what we're doing, and he is attempting to talk them down. Abruptly, one of the crew steps forward and throws a haymaker, catching the captain in the jaw. He crumples to the deck as a general melee breaks out around his fallen body. It takes me a few moments to locate Oleg and Helen at the fore of the ship near the large crane Oleg had installed for this excursion, seemingly oblivious to the weather and the battling seamen. The professor is guiding the baited hook over the side while his daughter works the controls of the crane. I shove my way through knots of fighting sailors and struggle to make my way to them as the ship continues to heave to and fro, causing me to stumble like a drunk. The wind has picked up and howls like a banshee, so that I have to shout to be heard when I finally reach Oleg. Professor, it's not safe here. We have to get back below deck. The storm is coming. Freezing rain suddenly erupts from the heavens, the screaming winds whipping the drops against my face so hard it stings. Lightning bolts the size of houses flash down from the sky, accompanied by peals of thunder so loud they make my head ring. Professor, I grab the man by the shoulder and spin him around, only to fall back in shock. The man facing me bears a certain resemblance to Oleg, certainly, but only just. He's younger, his face holding a certain agelessness that makes him seem paradoxically youthful and ancient in equal amounts. His eyes are light, with the glow of madness, his mouth open and a wolfish grin. Too late. He's too late to stop me now. He giggles like a lunatic. Shrieking peals of laughter accompany him, and I turned to see where Helen was operating the controls. Gone is my stunning Valkyrie, replaced by a hideous creature. Half of her body is covered in pale, perfect skin, the other rotting lumps of flesh the same purplish hue as the flecks in her eyes. Her cackles are lost as the wind whips itself into even greater fury, the ship rocking so hard I'm terrified we will capsize at any moment. The ship is thrashing, too hard for me to even contemplate trying to make it back to the hold. Just as I have this thought, an enormous wave washes over the deck, sweeping several sailors over the side. Their screams are quickly drowned by the raging storm. I spy a tumbling coil of rope. Desperately grabbing it, I manage to lash myself between two cargo brackets. Helen was right. I pull the ropes very tight, temporarily secure. I look around astonishingly. The man who was Oleg has jumped upon the bow, deftly riding the ship like an enraged bronco. Raising his arms towards the screaming heavens, he hails into the storm. Come, brother, meet your doom. With that, the largest wave yet slowly tilts the ship so that it is riding almost completely to its side. From where I'm lashed to the deck, I am now practically vertical, so that I have a perfect view of the roiling seas disappearing far off into the horizon. In that moment, my mind breaks. From out of the sea protrude miles and miles of glistening serpentine coils. The scales are the dull color of seaweed, encrusted with barnacles and all matter of ocean life, for that is where they have remained for a very long time. An enormous head the size of a mountain erupts from the depths, blind white eyes fixed above a cavernous mouth glistening with dozens of rows of fangs. Opening its great maw wide, Leviathan lets loose its battle cry. Its were so loud I feel my eardrums shatter and my skull high above in the clouds. My eyes can barely make out the tiny figure of a man, the heart of the storm. Bolts of lightning seem to coalesce around him, filling him with their impossible power. Shining like the sun, the figure streaks out of the sky like a comet, flying directly at the head of the serpent. The beast rears up to meet its foe, and on impact the world is enveloped in an incredible blast of white light brighter than the core of an atomic bomb. The stress of the heaving seas is finally too much, and I feel the hip shatter beneath me. Slowly the two broken halves descend into the seething waves. My only thought as the raging waters roll over me is that I may be one of the lucky ones. Soon, even that thought is lost as I sink deeper into the depths. My mind is black as the sea embracing me. Story 5. The Salesman. I was 15 years old during the weekend in June when everything would change. Why Mum had decided to skip town to visit her distant family, as she felt that she had earned a break. Nothing unusual about the decision to just up and leave, as she often goes to visit the other side, as she called it. She'd either visit her parents, a part of the family that I actually enjoy seeing, who occupy a modest cottage up in the hills of some English countryside, or if she as feeling tolerant, she would make the lengthy trip to see her annoying yuppie cousins, living it up in their seemingly never-ending Spanish property. That's where she was going this time. I never felt the need to put myself through listening to their constant, loud-mouthed whining of their quest for importance. But given the choice now, I would have sat through a week of their intolerable ramblin'. Gee, if I could have known what that weekend had planned for me. I was awakened by my mom on the Friday morning, and, as usual, she'd gotten me the day off school. I was told that he'd be back on Monday morning, just in time to make sure that I'd gone back to school to reassure my teachers that it was nothing more than a 3-day stomach bug. I carried her bags to the car, gave her a kiss on the cheek, waved her goodbye, and just like that, she was gone. I wandered into the kitchen to make my breakfast, all the while thinking how excited I had gotten the first time my mum had asked me to stay at home on my own. It was different now, nearing trivial. Almost the entirety of that first date insisted of me lazing about. I listened to my music, played some games, watched a movie, all of the usual things a bored teenager would do. Then I fell asleep. After what I think was about 2 hours of sleep, I was awoken in the evening by a knock. I arose from the couch like a zombie, still sleepy and aching from the awkward position that I'd somehow let my limbs rest in. I had initially planned to ignore the knock at the door, but the thought of it being a friend made me want to answer. Having company always made the weekend go faster. I clenched the door handle with a faint smile on my face and hoped that I didn't look as tired as I felt. With my eyes still half closed and that strange taste in my mouth that I get after a sleep, I opened the door. My eyes soon widened when I realized what I was looking at. A tall, bony-looking old man was standing in my door. He was dressed in a black suit and tie with an aging bowler hat placed on top of his scraggly gray hair. His white shirt was stained with a yellow and brown tint that I could only guess was coffee, and the shoes that he was wearing were very well kept, very shiny, so much so that I could see my reflection in them. He began to speak. His words were hushed, maybe even hissed in a childlike sort of tone, but I couldn't focus. I knew he was speaking, but I couldn't concentrate on the words he was saying, not while I was looking at his face, staring into his eyes. His aged complexion was taut, wrinkled and very pale, almost like a hazy shade of silver, but the edges of his eyes were completely black. What looked like smeared charcoal surrounding his vision only highlighted the depth of his gaze. There was nothing human about them. They seemed hollow, lifeless. The fear that gripped me when he stared straight through me was like nothing that I'd ever felt before. I took a deep breath and finally mumbled a word. "Hello," I said. He smiled. A disgruntled plight to infect my dreams. It seemed to extend upwards toward his ears as if there was nothing stopping it. His mouth was packed with razor-sharp, dirty black teeth. Every once in a while his black tongue would swipe the surface of his upper deck in a slurp. With his head tilted slightly to the left, he crooned softly, "Hello there, child. I am here to offer you something important, something that you might need. I'm a salesman, you see, just a salesman, please. All I need is a moment of your time in exchange for some peace of mind. Are you interested?" I couldn't move. I could hardly breathe. I felt frozen. Terror had encompassed me. "I finally uttered a sentence. "I can't. I have to go. It's too much. I'm sorry." The door slammed behind me, and I could breathe again. I could think. I slouched down to the ground, trying to process what I had witnessed, when out of nowhere a thud made itself known. I looked up with my mouth ajar and my eyes darting about. Then I slowly stood. Making my way into the kitchen, I could hear a gentle humming. It was a happy kind of tune, but the unknown source made me shiver. My stomach dropped as I turned the corner. He was there, humming that tune, smiling that smile as he sat at my table just staring at me. I backed away towards the front door where I was welcomed by a shadow that can't be him, I thought to myself. I began to tear up. I couldn't help it. I headed straight upstairs, past my bedroom, past my mom's room, and vanished into the bathroom. I could hear him. He was singing now, right outside the door. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Then it hit me. My only choice. I couldn't believe I was actually contemplating climbing out of the second-floor window, but I had to. The shadow passing by through the light on the other side of the door was forcing me to do it. I opened the bathroom window and stared outside, but then I stopped. There he was, standing on the edge of my garden, waving at me and slowly drifting down the road, taking his song with him and slowly fading into the distance. That night I slept in the bathroom with the door and window locked. I set up a bed using a bunch of towels. I just couldn't bring myself to leave until daylight emerged. The next day finally arrived, after what seemed to be the longest night of my life, and I had to get out of the house. I went over to stay at my friend's house for the day. Ada. M was his name, a small, skinny guy who I'd known all my life. I thought that he could help me forget about what had happened. It's a strange feeling you get when something so frightening happens to you, but seems so unrealistic. You begin to doubt yourself. It's almost as if you have two minds. But I knew in my heart that it was real, and if I didn't believe after the first meeting with the salesman, it would definitely be forever etched in my mind. After the weekend was over, later that night I was told that I couldn't stay at Adam's house as his family had to get up for church in the morning. I begged and pleaded with him to let me stay, but his stubborn mother was having none of it and sent me on my way. I only lived 3 streets from where his house was, so it wasn't much of a walk, but I still had to walk back in the dark of night, and I wasn't looking forward to it at all. That face kept creeping into my mind. The fact that someone had been able to scare me out of my own home was sickening. And that damn song he kept humming. I turned the corner and I could hear it. The tune, the voice, he was here. I looked down the road expecting it to be empty, just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. But there he was, standing under the street light, staring at me, smiling. He began to walk towards me, his hum turning into a song, singing louder and louder as he began to run at me. I had to run. I sprinted in the other direction as fast as I could. I could hear his footsteps behind me. How is he so fast? My frazzled mind wondered. I had to get back to Adam's house. I turned the corner and banged on Adam's door frantically. Open the door. Open the door, I shouted. His mother answered, looking terrified, questioning what had happened to me. I stumbled into their house and scurried backwards, only to look outside and realize that he was gone. Was it my imagination? It couldn't have been, but there was nothing there, nothing, except for an old bowler hat on the ground. Needless to say, she let me stay at the house that night because, as she put it, I wasn't fit to stay on my own. I woke the next morning feeling like a mess and looking even worse, but at least the sun was out. I had to get back home. I hadn't been there in a whole day, and I had to make sure everything was okay. I thanked Adam and apologized to his mom. Then I was off on my way. I stood at my front door, took a deep breath, and gripped the handle. Then I heard a bang, then another, and I jumped back from the door in pure fear. I couldn't believe it was him again. How is he doing this? Just as I had gathered the courage to turn the handle and go inside, my opened the door to me. I'd never been so happy to see her in my entire life. I hugged her and told her never to leave me on my own again. After that we went inside and sat together all day. Something, we haven't done since I was a young boy, and everything felt safe again. She showed me her new white dress that she had bought while she was away. She told me all about her visit to her annoying cousins and spoke very highly of her weekend. But I couldn't do the same that afternoon. I told her everything that had happened. She listened intently and couldn't believe that something so horrible had happened to me. She felt so guilty. She apologized over and told me that we would go to the police station the next day. But right now it could wait, and we had to get ready for dinner. Washington confused that she had said that, but I suppose I was safe with her. An hour or so later, we settled down for our meal. I told her all about school, explained to her how much better I had gotten on guitar, update her on my love life, and she just sat there and listened, smiling as I ate my meal. She stared at me, and I felt uneasy. Her smile slowly got bigger and bigger. All the while, her white dress slowly melted into a black suit. She hissed, "You see how easy it is to give someone some of your time." At that moment, he stood right in front of me. I cried out loud. I knew it wasn't over. "What do you want? Why me? Why my mom? You know why I chose you, child. You never listened. I told you it could have been something that you might need. I told you it was important, but you ignored me. You didn't have the time, your precious time. The only way I could get you to listen was by using the one person that you trust, that you listen to, and let's just say that I like to be somebody else, if only for a while. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll listen now." "It's too late for that. It's too late. It's a shame too, child, because it really could have saved your life." Then that was it. It was over. Done. So how am I writing this now? Why am I telling you all of this? Well, you've given me some of your time, so here is your opposed peace of mind. I like to be somebody else, if only for a while. Story 6. I hope I never dream again. Dreams are supposed to be a magical place, a place where we can escape from our everyday lives. Our imagination can run free. I have often heard my friends complain that they don't dream enough or that their dreams are too dull, but not me. Ever since I was young, I have had dreams frequently, and I used to enjoy them. However, nowadays my dreams are a bit different. I'll start at the beginning, because where else would I start? I have always had quite a mundane life, living in a small town with next to nothing to do. Friends weren't exactly my strong suit growing up, so I relied on my imagination for my own entertainment. Although I think this is quite a common thing for most kids to do anyway, as I said, I would dream very frequently, almost every night, if not every other night. Nothing ever stood out from these dreams, though. In fact, most would be forgotten by the time I crawled my way to breakfast. Unfortunately, these forgettable dreams couldn't last forever. I am currently 22 years old, and the new dreams began around 2 years ago. It was a night like any other. Nothing abnormal happened during the day. I was simply ready to go to sleep, and so I did. Once I did, I found myself in a world of gray. It wasn't necessarily dark, just bland. There were gray houses, gray streets, gray grass, essentially an atypical neighborhood, but everything was a shade of gray. Looking around, I saw almost nothing of note until I spot a woman sitting on a bench, a woman I did not recognize. From what I have read, the brain does not simply invent faces. We can only dream of what we've seen. So, perhaps this woman was someone I had walked by in a crowd once or seen in the background of a TV show. Someone I had seen just long enough to conjure their face in my dream. The woman looked to be in her mid-30s, with long gray hair, small gray eyes, gray lips, and her clothes were, well, you guessed it, gray. She had typical soccer mom look. That is, if soccer moms had no color to them. She stood there, completely still, like she was simply a prop to this world. Then, after a long stare down, she began to raise her right arm. She began to point at something. The direction she was pointing was close to me, but not directly at me. As I began to turn to look at what she was pointing at, I was ripped from my dream. I found myself lying in my bed on my side. My heart was beating incredibly fast. Yet I had no clue why. Thoughts were racing through my mind. Who was that woman? What was she pointing at? My mind was moving so fast it took me a few moments to realize I couldn't move. I was completely frozen, laying on my side, with my head facing my wall. That's when I heard my bedroom door open. My eyes were wide open, but I was not in a position that I could see who was at my door. My mind began to rationalize the situation. It must have been my younger sister. Perhaps she had a nightmare and she had come to my room for comfort. I began to hear footsteps approaching my bed. The closer they got, the more I thought how heavy these footsteps were for a small child to have. But despite my suspicions, I could not move. The only thing I could do was wait as my ears were glued to the wall, just out of sight of my intruder. Eventually, the footsteps stopped at the foot of my bed. The next sound would be the creaking of the springs in my mattress. And he began to slowly crawl onto my bed. I could feel the mattress began to sink where my feet lay. In my position, this person was still completely unseen by me, and they continued to climb until they were directly behind me. I began to feel light breaths down my neck, yet I still could not move. This went on for what seemed like hours. Then the breathing stopped, as I felt a cold hand go across the midsection of my back. This was finally enough. I regained control of my body as I flipped over and let out a monstrous scream. Yet there was no one air, nor was there any sign anyone had ever been there. No impressions had been left in my bed, and my door was still shut like it always was when I went to sleep. There was nothing. Most people have already decided that what I experienced was sleep paralysis, and I agree. I have done extensive research on sleep paralysis since that day, and it matches up almost perfectly to what I experienced. However, there is one problem. The spot on my back where the cold hand touched me now holds a scar. It's a small line that stretches horizontally across the mid of my back. Before that night I had no wound there, nor any previous scarring on my back. As much as I wished it was just a terrible case of sleep paralysis, even then I knew it had to be something more. Life returned to normal for a short while. After this, I no longer dreamed at all, which did not bother me. I began to sleep with my bathroom light on for extra light, as I see how no longer stand to be in a room that was too dark to see. I also began sleeping on my back, so even if I was experiencing sleep paralysis, I would have a clear view of my whole room after about 8 a.m. I had almost convinced myself that I was delusional. I even chalked up the scarring to something that I must have missed at some point. Perhaps it had always been there. That was until the second dream came. Once again I found myself in the gray world. It was much the same as last time, this time an almost empty street, and of course with no color. Only now it was not a woman that stood in front of me. Instead it was a man. The man was older, probably in his 70s, if not older. But once again it was a face I could not recognize. The previous woman had had no expression. In fact, the only part of her that even moved was her arm when she began to point. This man, however, was wearing a smirk, as if he knew something that I did not. But other than this, he too was completely motionless. I guessed what would happen next, and sure enough the man began to raise his arm. Only he did not begin to point anywhere in my direction. Instead, he extended his arm all the way to his shoulder and extended his thumb as if to say, "Behind me." Despite what happened last time, I was too curious to not attempt to see what he was pointing at. I began moving toward the man. I placed my right hand on the man to push him aside, and as I did, I once again found myself in my bed. This time I realized instantly that I could not move. My eyes darted towards my door, anticipating another visit like last time, only it did not come. Instead, I noticed a shadow on the edge of my bathroom wall, reflecting off the light that I had left on. The shadow seemed to have been waiting for me to notice it, because once I did, it began to raise a hand and held it there, almost as if it was giving a still wave. After a few seconds it put down in its hand, and it slowly began to inch its way across the wall, stretching into my room. I wanted to run, scream, or do anything to get away from this shadow, but I couldn't. My body refused to move as this shadow slowly crept along the wall towards me. After a few agonizing moments, the shadow finally reached the wall next to me, and it paused, as if to study me. Then after a few seconds it overtook me. The moment it happened, I once again regained control of my body, and once again I let out a scream that could terrify anyone. My whole body felt like it was on fire. It was a much more intense sensation than the cold touch I had felt last time. It only lasted a few seconds, however, and as I looked down at myself, I noticed I was fine, covered in sweat, and possibly some OT. Her bodily fluids, but otherwise fine. That is, except for the new scar that adorned my right hand, the same hand that I had touched the old man with. At this point I was more confused than ever. He dreams had come from nowhere, along with the living. Nightmares, the gray world obviously had to have some connection to what was happening to me. Each dream the figure had pointed somewhere, and each time I attempted to look I was brought back to reality. Or at least I think it was reality. I want to believe it is just a combination of odd dreams and sleep paralysis. But the scars street staring back at me make me question everything. It took almost an entire year for the next dream to come, and in between I had had no other dreams. Of course, when it came, where else would I be but the gray world? This time I was inside a house, an empty and colorless house. I began to move from room to room until I spotted it, a child sitting on the floor. I say it because this child was essentially androgynous. I could not tell whether it was a boy or a girl. They were around 8 years old, I'd say, with mid-length gray hair and no facial characteristics. The T would imply a gender. The child was sat upon the floor, coloring. Well, if you would consider a gray crayon drawing on a gray piece of paper, coloring, that is. Without even looking up, the child began to raise its arm that didn't have the crayon and began to point to the side. I won't look, I said. This caused the child to stop drawing and look up at me. At your age, I've ate to look, it said. Why, every time I do I wake up to something terrible, I responded. If you don't look, he'll get angry, the child said, ignoring my question. Who is he? I beckoned. The child let out a sigh before saying, just hurry and look, you're running out of time. After everything I had experienced, I had no reason to trust what the child was saying. So, instead of looking, I instead closed my eyes, and I began trying to will myself back to reality. And after a few seconds, it worked. I found myself back in my bed, and this time I was fully capable of moving. Nothing came for me that night. No mysterious figure climbing into my bed, and no shadows approaching me. Had I beaten the gray world? Was it just that simple as to not trust the people there? That brings it back to current day. Over a year later, I'd like to think that it is all over, that I will never have to see the gray world again, that my normal dreams have not returned. In fact, I haven't dreamt a single time since my last night in the gray world. I still have so many questions. Who were those people? What were they pointing at that they wanted me to look so bad? But most important, why? Who was the child referring to? Could this possibly be the person or entity that is responsible for what has been happening to me? I'm not sure. If I never dream again, I would be satisfied, but I fear that won't be the case. I'm terrified that one day the gray world will return, but I'm even more terrified of what I'll find when I wake up. Will he be waiting for me? Story 7, a story about a dog. I've heard it said before that if you believe in angels, you must believe in demons as well. I'm not sure if I truly believe that either really exist, and my leanings change from mood to mood, but there are times when I wonder if there is something there watching us, cloaked in the dark, hating us. When I felt the presence of something I couldn't see, when instinct so borrowed logic, and I couldn't close my eyes or turn my back to it, because I just didn't know. I can say with a certain amount of confidence that everyone has felt this way at some point in their life with varying degrees of intensity and frequency. But that's not what this is about, not entirely anyway. When I let myself believe in such things, I realized that it started around 10 years ago when I spent a week at my aunt and uncle's house. They lived several hours away from my own home, and this was something I had always hated, seeing as their children were the only ones in the fam. Any were close to my age. There were plenty of movies, games, and other activities to keep me occupied during my stay, bookending my experience in a way that nearly erased it from my thoughts altogether. Afterwards, it had seemed such a small thing to me that I mentioned it to no one. It was late at night at some point in the middle of my stay. I'd woken quite suddenly in my bed for seemingly no reason at all and couldn't get back to sleep, even after what seemed to be hours of laying in the dark. Defeated, I decided to get up and move around, maybe get a glass of water. Before trying again, I looked to the clock and noticed that it was very late, early morning in fact. 3-something it said, but what could I do? As I walked out into the hallway, I noticed that I didn't feel quite right, a bit sick in my stomach and slightly anxious. Unsettled, I turned on every light I came across, but maybe that was only my childish fear of the dark getting the best of me. I was only 11 at the time, after all. Despite my attempts to reason I dread away, to banish it as I had done the dark, the feeling persisted all the way to the kitchen. I needed to calm down if I was to get any further sleep that night. I got myself a glass, filled it from the tap, and sat down at the kitchen table. I felt a bit lonely, knowing that I was the only person awake in the house, and I disliked looking at the empty chairs, so I turned my gaze to the large glass doors instead, the impenetrable pitch of the night blocking the backyard from view. I couldn't see anything out there, but I froze instantly. Instinctively, I was being watched. Something was approaching the door, the windows. I couldn't see it, but it could see me clearly. I saw the light flooding the kitchen. I was bathed in it, completely exposed, but I couldn't see out. Everything was awful. I wanted to run, but I couldn't make myself move an inch, not even to look away, and these flimsy, hateful walls, a thin pane of glass. What good would any of that do? None. Nowhere was safe, and it was coming. Soon enough I could make out the shape. It was at eye level with me on all fours. I couldn't see it with my eyes, not physically, but something in me inexplicably knew it was there, knew what it looked like and how it moved. Closer still, and I could distinguish its features, thick, matted black fur against the black night, a chain around its throat, and yellow eyes that stared in at me through the glass. Its teeth and maw were dripping with saliva. It was a large dog, and it wasn't at the same time. It stopped just outside the door and glared at me. Snarls ripped from its throat, but I couldn't hear any of it. Not really. I was too terrified to move, paralyzed by its malevolent gaze. It's not real, I thought. Just get up and walk away. Go back to bed. Eventually I did. I left my water on the table, full and tepid, and crept quietly up the stairs. It felt as if any sudden moves might set it off. So I did everything slowly and carefully until I was lying in my bed. Despite my expectations, I was able to fall asleep relatively quickly. I don't think I even dreamed. In the morning, with the light of day and the presence of other people around me, the whole thing could be written off as a figment of my imagination. I was obviously spooked by something from the moment I got up. So it wasn't that far-fetched that my mind would play such a trick on me. I didn't say anything to anyone, simply because I didn't think it was anything significant. I mean, what even happened, I didn't exactly forget about it. But I didn't let it worry me either. It wasn't even something to move on from, just a strange thing that happened. Life went on. The next few years were difficult and rather hard on my family. Financially, emotionally, and health-wise as well. We got along well enough. Even after our house was foreclosed on, we switched towns, switched schools, and moved to a much smaller house as we waited for things to get better. I was 14 and starting high school when things started to settle down again. I didn't exactly approve of our new home. My brother and I lived downstairs in the basement, and our rooms shared a wall. We enjoyed each other's company well enough, so it wasn't that bad spending so much time together, but there were times when he could get on my nerves. I would often stay up rather late reading in my room, and I even truly came to notice a strange clicking noise coming from his bedroom every couple of nights around midnight. It sounded as if he was flicking his light on and off. But why would he do that? I decided to just leave him be for a while, but the thing is, the more I noticed it, the more it started to bother me. I came to expect it to happen almost every night. A couple of weeks later, it was keeping me up at night wondering what my brother thought he was doing, waiting until it would eventually stop. After a bit of internal debate, I decided to just ask him to please stop perhaps not so nicely though. However, when I knocked and opened his door, I found the room dark and my brother himself in bed, apparently fast asleep. How strange. I closed the door and returned to my room. The odd noise persisted. The next day I decided that I was going to do a little experiment. Something must be making that noise after all. I told my brother what I noticed and asked him to go around the basement rooms and click various things, lights, doors, anything, while I waited and listened in my room for the sound that matched the one I was hearing at night. Turns out it was the light in the little closet with the boiler that was attached to his room. There was a bare light bulb inside, and the pulling of that chain made the noise I had been hearing at night. There was no further explanation to be found. Soon after, my brother started reporting strange dreams and the eerie feeling that he was being watched. Even during the day, I assumed this was in response to our discovery and mentally dismissed it while outwardly showing my support and sympathy, until I started experiencing the same sort of thing. I would wake up at night paralyzed with fear, sometimes coming out of disturbing nightmares, other times out of perfectly normal sleep. I could no longer fall asleep with my back exposed. I found myself unable to bear leaving my door open at night. During the day, I felt paranoid, always looking over my shoulder and waiting for something to hurt me. Weeks later, something finally happened to me while I was lifting my foot climb the stairs and join my family for a meal. Not a single thought in my head. I was suddenly awash with terror. I just ran to the door at the top of the stairs, frightened out of my wits for no apparent reason. When I stepped into the daylight, I turned around and looked behind me. It was there, at the bottom of the stairs, watching me. That dog, I knew it was there, but I couldn't see it. Just like before, I closed the door and walked into the kitchen. No one saw or heard anything of my momentary panic, and I didn't feel like enlightening them. Not even my brother, strange no. Eyes are fine, a creepy, unexplainable thing, but you're seeing phantom dogs now. Liar, stupid, overactive imagination. Calm the hell down. I didn't want to go back down there, ever. But eventually, I just got back into the habit of it, feeling constant dread. That's just normal. Cringing away from empty air. Normal. Nightmare again. Totally normal. My parents started arguing a lot. Dad would leave, going out on walks to clear his head. Gone for so long we'd start to wonder if he was ever coming back. We moved again, switch towns, switch schools, my grades. Went down the toilet, my real-life problems taste the unnatural. Fear away, everything sort of peaked, and then slowly started to get better over the course of the next year. My aunt and uncle came to town and we went out to lunch one day. The conversation was light-hearted enough between my siblings and cousins until my brother brought up the weird happenings in our old house. My cousin latched onto this and told us a few paranormal stories of her own. One day, she said, she was playing with her friends in their old backyard when she heard a noise. She said she didn't really hear it exactly, but she knew the sound. When she looked up, she saw a great big dog with a jingling chain around its neck. She had screamed and run inside to her mom, crying uncontrollably and completely inconsolable. She said she didn't really understand what had happened. Feeling distinctly unsettled, I asked her what the dog looked like. Big and black, she said, with shaggy fur, yellow eyes. I asked, yes, yellow eyes, and it was bigger than a normal dog, taller. I saw that dog too, when I was staying at your house. I told them the short little story of how I woke up and saw a big, scary dog through the doors in their kitchen. We thought it was fun, this strange coincidence. Apparently it was around the same time as well. What was going on then? I wondered aloud. That was right around the time a close relative started to get so dangerously sick. That was right before Mom and Dad's business started going down, and Uncle lost his job, and my IOU's family couple started fighting, and then we lost the house. But then things started to get better, until it showed up again. What if? No way. This was just a figment of my imagination, and hers a coincidence. There was no demon dog following us around and bringing misfortune to our family. No way. Demons aren't real. Angels aren't real either. There's nothing watching from the shadows, waiting while people sleep. There can't be, because if there is, I don't think I could ever feel safe again. There's nothing there, saying it doesn't help much when I can feel it so strongly, watching, its gaze prickling all along my spine. What if our eyes aren't seeing everything that's really there? And there is something in the dark that just wants to ask. Pre-add pain and misery. There would be no reasoning with such things, no fighting, so they can't be real.